Namaste. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to start the session by reading a few passages from Savitri. In the slow process of the evolving spirit, in the brief stay between a death and birth, a first perfection stage is reached at last. Out of the wood and stone of our nature's stuff, a temple is shaped where the high gods could live. Even if the struggling world is left outside, one man's perfection still can save the world. This was from the chapter The Finding of the Soul. Another passage. To seize the absolute in shapes that pass, to fix the eternal's touch in time-made things. This is the law of all perfection here. A fragment here is caught of heaven's design, else could we never hope for greater life, and ecstasy and glory could not be. Even in the littleness of our mortal state, even in this prison house of outer form, a brilliant passage for the infallible flame is driven through gross walls of nerve and brain. A splendor presses or a power breaks through. Earth's great dull barrier is removed awhile. The inconscient seal is lifted from our eyes, and we grow vessels of creative might. The enthusiasm of a divine surprise pervades our life. A mystic stir is felt. A joyful anguish trembles in our limbs. A dream of beauty dances through the heart. A thought from the eternal mind draws near. Intimations cast from the invisible, awaking from infinity's sleep come down. Symbols of that which never yet was made. This passage was from The Kingdom of the Subtle Matter. So today's topic is perfection. So first of all, I think I'm very grateful to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for giving me courage to talk on this topic. Like when I wanted to choose a topic to deliver a talk on, somehow I wanted to do it on perfection, but when I was going through a lot of compilations, I felt the topic is very, very significant and very powerful in itself. And a lot of passages from Synthesis of Yoga, Life Divine, some of the major works of Sri Aurobindo, completely focused on perfection. And I think for all of us in integral yoga, what Sri Aurobindo I think predominantly emphasizes is he talks about the yoga of self-perfection. So nothing but our entire life, our entire each and every moment, to what extent can we perfect ourselves? And very interestingly, perfection is not something that is absolute. Like it is a very relative aspect of the nature. So it's not like we have reached a state of perfection, it's done. Even at the supramental level, Sri Aurobindo talks that like one of the sadhaks asks, like you're saying that there are different levels even at the supramental level. So does it mean that somebody who's attained supramental siddhi, does it mean that he is different from somebody else who has attained it? Then Sri Aurobindo explains, perfection is very relative, where even that person who has attained must have a lot of time must have passed, and even the richness and the depth of what the person's progress is, that is different from somebody else who's attained it. So when we are trying to understand this perfection as a very deep concept which is evolving continuously, that is something very interesting about aspect of perfection. And when we come to what mother has talked about, I think perfection is one of the most important elements of Maha Saraswati aspect of the mother. So the four powers of the mother, out of which Maha Saraswati is one of the aspect, and completely Maha Saraswati is about perfection in our life. And also, if we look at Sri Aurobindo's life in itself, I think he always, in every work he did, he wanted to do to utmost perfect level. So one example, I think I have never heard of anybody write a book for 30 years, but Sri Aurobindo has written Savitri for a period of 30 years. He kept evolving, he kept improvising, he kept perfecting. So that's, I think, just one example of how he constantly worked towards perfection. And also, if we look at the mother's life, I think there were so many people who used to tell, even mother, the way mother would sit and the way mother would walk, every act outwardly and inwardly, I think she was always an epitome of perfection. So even the way she would play tennis or even paint, so many aspects. So I think that's the importance, and it's coming from them who have not just given a theoretical aspect of perfection, but they have been living examples of what they have taught us. So I think that brings us to the point of today's topic, perfection, which is something as the devotees of Sri Aurobindo and the mother and as their children, it's important for us to keep this amount of importance. So mother has said Vedic rishis, they have done a lot of tapas and they have thirsted for immortality. And when we look at Buddha, his life was all about understanding the permanence of things. Is there anything that is permanent in this life? So that was the question that he always went after. And Jesus, it was more of compassion. Like he was somebody who preached compassion, and he wanted to talk about it, and he wanted everybody to live, have a compassionate life. But for Sri Aurobindo, the goal was always perfection without a doubt, is what mother also tells us. So what is perfection? Now, moving on in the talk. So in today's talk, we will understand perfection, the meaning of perfection, and different types of perfection. There is mundane perfection, there is a lower perfection, there is a higher perfection, spiritual perfection. So we'll try to understand the different aspects of perfection, and also we'll try to understand, like I said, yoga of self-perfection. As a part of that, we will understand the perfection of the mind, perfection of the vital, perfection of the prana, psychic prana, and the integral perfection. So we will try to cover all of this, and perfection of the body as well. So what mother says in simple terms for us to understand, perfection is all that we want to become in our highest aspiration. So whatever we can be, whatever the max, the potential of a human being can be, that is the level of perfection. Now again, when I'm saying the maximum a human can be, it is definitely not entirely by himself. It is only when there is a union with a higher power is when the person is transformed completely. So we will understand about that a little deeper. So Sri Aurobindo says, perfection in yoga is the transformation of the lower undivine aspects of ourselves into a higher divine nature. So interestingly here you see he doesn't reject any aspects that we have as human beings. For example, anger, jealousy, hatred, everything he calls it as lower undivine. He doesn't say that this is something that should be rejected, but Sri Aurobindo's yoga is all about transforming, because these are also important. Where we will look at how intensity, how the rajasic element of all of us. So the Rudra and the Shakti both are important. So the calmness as well as the intensity. So both of these together, and when both of them merge and become one, and when we are able to feel that oneness throughout, that's when we have the perfection is attained. So in terms of knowledge, what is perfection? That when one is able to cast away the darker, broken aspects of oneself and the imperfect aspects of our knowledge. That is, a lot of times our thinking is very fragmented. What we think today, tomorrow it's more of our thinking has changed because we have learned something new. Our experiences keep getting evolved. So now this is nothing but it's broken. It's a lower aspect because we are constantly evolving. So transforming from this to more of a rounded, luminous fullness of our real and spiritual personality. So that's more of in terms of knowledge. In terms of devotion and adoration, it is more of growing into the likeness of the nature, or the law of being the divine, being united with whom we aspire to become. Like what the mother also has said, the highest that is possible of us. And when is it that we are moving towards the perfection, epitome of perfection? When there is a unity between the transcending and the universal and the individual spirit. When all of these three are united, that's when we have reached the level of perfection. And a divine perfection of human being is our aim. That's what I was telling you. It's not the human perfection that we are looking at. Of course, that is something that is not, it's not that, okay, you should not be perfect in our outer life, but we'll also look at how being perfect in our outer life is also very important, and only when we have a conquest of our inner energies, when we will be able to also, in our outer life is also gets transformed. So a divine perfection of the human being. So for that, we must first understand the essential elements that constitute the man's total perfection. We need to understand what is human perfection, what is divine perfection, and we need to understand that we are, as humans, capable of self-development. And at least, we need to put our mind to it, like conceive the idea of perception, fix to it, and have this as one of the most important aims in our life. That's when we are actually attempting, and this is like the first step we are making towards perfection. So a lot of times we think we are doing something perfectly, but it happens for a while, and then we again forget about it and we get into our older kind of habits. But when we conceive the idea of perfection, the more we are committed and we have the perseverance towards perfecting ourselves, the higher are we going to progress in the aspect of perfection. Sri Aurobindo says the foundation of our spiritual life should be mostly turned inward rather than outward. Now, why is this? Because the inner reality that we have. So here what he means is first of all, our outer life, we usually work based on our thoughts, feelings, actions. Mostly, our outer life is based on that. But when our inner reality, so basically our inner power is something that needs to dominate these aspects. So the psychic being, what the Sri Aurobindo calls the inner spark, spiritual spark that we all have, the divine spark that is always highest and the truth always. So that when the psychic has an influence on our mind, life and body, that's when our life is moving towards perfection. But a lot of times, our outward externalized consciousness is something that dominates most of us. And when that is the case, of course, the divine life is something for a person who is very motivated, always having a lot of materialistic aims. For that person, the aspect of divinity is something that does not make sense to him. His will towards moving towards a higher life doesn't come to his mind at all. And why is it that okay, we have to move inwards? Why is it that we cannot move outwards, or why is it not important to move outwards? Is because the world that is outside of us is imperfect, ignorant and obscure, and our external conscious being itself is always created with a lot of mixed up energies, lot of pressure, and our physical birth, even our environment, everything, we are influenced by a lot of truth, untruth, mix of all of this. So we are not really aware. When we are so much pulled outwardly, we are not able to realize that there is something within all of us which is greater than what is there outside, and which is a spirit that is just self-existent in itself, which is luminous, self-determining, and it itself is perfect. We don't have to look anywhere outside for when we have to grow. All we have to do is look within. It's that simple is what divine has made our human life. So the inner life should become important when we are striving towards perfection. And through this is how we have to transform the mind, body and spirit. Then how do we start this? So we can look at our day-to-day life. So where is it that we can align ourselves? So the morning we can wake up and have a simple prayer, and different parts of the day, where is it that I can connect to the divine? How is it? What is it that's more useful for me? What is it that makes me silent through the day? So whenever there is agitation, can I close my eyes? Can I perfect myself? Can I perfect my emotions? Can I perfect the way I talk to somebody? Can I perfect the way I pray? Can I aspire for something more perfect? So in each and every aspect of our life, day-to-day life itself, we can look at when is it can I withdraw from the outer influences and go deep within. So man, the mental being, has an imperfect life because mind is not the first and highest power of consciousness of the being. A lot of times our life is dominated by our mind. Why are you doing this? Why can't you do something else? Always we are having a constant inner talk. Right? That's the reason why our life is imperfect. And even if the mind is perfected, there would be still something to be realized and manifested. For what is involved and emergent is not a mind but a spirit. Like even look at the scientists in the world, across the world, or even the top businessmen. For them, even if they've achieved a lot in their life, they're still not happy. They still feel that it's not complete, and it is they need to do something more. That quenches thirst is always there. And somebody who is even in the Einstein, for example, in the later stages of his life, he attributed, though throughout his life he never believed in the power, God's power. In the later stages of his life, he himself, agreed that there is a power that is guiding all of us, and that's something beyond what human mind can conceive. So that is something that we all need to keep in mind, and that is something which is the power of the spiritual being. So Mother says that the process of creation, so how we all took birth and how the world itself came in place, all this happened in a very unconscious way, yet perfection was there. So perfect unconscious way. But what it has to move towards is more of a conscious perfection. And yes, animals, plants, everything in itself is striving towards perfection, but it's more of an instinctive nature, and how nature itself is trying to move towards perfection in its own way, in an unconscious way. But man has the power, capacity to work towards perfection with a conscious will. And between the state of conscious perfection and unconscious perfection lies imperfection. So that's where we are all stuck and making progress each and every day. So in the process of this change, there are two stages of working. So in the process of us becoming, first, becoming aware of the soul, mind and heart of the divine possibility, and turning towards this as one of our main objectives. So that is the first thing. Now what happens when we turn towards the divine? All of us definitely have this as one of the aims, and that's why we are here today, to understand about this aspect. But what happens is, when we are moving towards this, there are many times that we are drawn by other influences, and this is definitely not one of our utmost aims. So when somebody at least turns towards the divine possibility, then he or she needs to prepare himself, get rid of everything that is of the lower aspect. At least there is an opening that is formed. And the next stage, so in the first stage also we have the spiritual desire for the divine. So we want to we want to be moved by a higher force, a divine power, because all of us are in that stage where we are aspiring for the divinity to be there in our human lives. But a greater perfection can only be arrived at a higher power entering and taking up the whole action of the being. This is the second stage of the yoga. Therefore, a persistent giving up of all the action of the nature into the hands of this greater power, a substitution of its influence, position, and working of the personal effort until the divine to whom we aspire becomes the direct master of the yoga and effects this entire spiritual and ideal conversion of the being. That's when we can say that it's a higher perfection. But all of us are in the process of becoming and moving towards this level of perfection. Then Sri Aurobindo talks about the mundane perfection. So what is mundane perfection is more of the outward perfection, though. So it's more of a social perfection. So somebody who's being very nice to others, he's excelling at talking to somebody else in human relationships, a more rational way of dealing with our friends. Better, maybe somebody is being a very good father, good mother, sister, brother. So discharging our duties, responsibilities, fulfilling our roles as perfectly as possible. All of these aspects become a part of our mundane perfection. And even, mundane perfection is also more of enjoying the opportunities as it comes, being a part of it. Now, when this element, when somebody is having this mundane perfection, of course, it is not wrong. A person is trying to be perfect in an outward manner. But what we understood that perfection is more when the highest perfection is more when it is turned inward, and more when it is spiritualized and divinized. So when this mundane perfection happens, only one of the elements, either mind or either the person's emotion is perfected and transformed, but other aspects is still not transformed, is still not perfected. That's why it's not a complete aspect of perfection. Now somebody who is having a mundane perfection, maybe working towards it, going to institutions, getting trained. But somebody who's working more of inwardly is constantly watching himself, constantly observing his acts, observing his mind, observing his vital energy, observing his bodily aspects. So an inner self training and development, that is something that is happening inside of us, and if that is something that we are focusing constantly on, then we are making progress. The mundane perfection can be moving towards the higher perfection as well. So both of these, some inner life and outer life, is what we have to perfect. Then mother talks about moral perfection. Moral perfection is when a person, you look at the person is very good in whatever he does. There are no errors, no defects in what he is doing. When conceives, when that person wants to always be the best of version of himself, and always, mentally you can see that person is doing any things in a perfect manner. Now when somebody is looking at that kind of person, a lot of times, wow, that person is a spiritual person, because he is morally, is always good and does what is right. But mother says that is not spiritual perfection, that is a moral perfection. Yes, that is one of the levels of human perfection. It is the summit of man's mental evolution. So now what is a spiritual perfection is when one has to let go of the ego. What happens in a moral perception, perfection, we always think it is we who is doing it perfectly, and we do it as perfectly as we can. But there is the element of ego, and when that a person lets go of the ego and allows the divine energy to flow through him and let the divine power take over his life, that's when moral perfection can be transformed to a spiritual perfection. Now, mother also talks about a lower perfection and a higher perfection. Higher perfection is what we looked at earlier. Lower perfection is what, she, like, in fact, what we all strive towards in our day-to-day life. We look at doing certain things as perfectly as possible, and any of the aspects, when we look at artists, when we look at somebody very genius in their in whichever profession they are in, all of these, because it's dominated by again the mind or even body, because even the gymnasts and sports people who do things to utmost perfection, all of these, she says, it's more of a lower perfection. And when the lower perfection, higher perfection is when the divine takes over the life of the human, and when that's transformed, it becomes the higher perfection. And the aim of human perfection must include two things. One is self-mastery and the mastery of the surroundings. So the self-mastery here, mother talks about Swarat and Samrat. Okay, Sri Aurobindo talks about it as Swarat and Samrat. So the self-ruler, who is the self-ruler? When he is somebody who is not succumbing to the attack of the lower vital aspects, the turbulence of grief, joy, when somebody is not moved by these emotions, and when somebody is not always, the violent touches of the pleasure, pain, and the emotions, passions, attachments, likings, desires, when somebody is not always moved by this, and the narrowness of personal judgment, all of this, when somebody is above this. So in simple terms, if I have to say, when you are able to acquire mastery over your emotions, your thinking, and your actions, that's when one can say that you are a self-ruler. And to be quite free from all of this, if possible, at least the master and superior to them. And only when you are able to have a conquest of your inwardly, will there be an outward conquest. So what, in other words, inside, when you are able to make progress within, that's when you can also make the progress outwardly. So the ideal of the yoga takes the form of Swarajya and Samrajya. So when one is having a larger spiritual basis, and when one is open to the divine degrees of the spirit and oneness with the infinite, that's when we are able to say we are able to, the spiritual power acting upon the finite things is being transformed to the infinite. And that's when the integral perfection of our being is achieved. Right? So the lower perfection was more of unconscious, imperfect, automatic, and more of a subconscious obedience it has. But the higher perfection, what happens, it's more spontaneous obedience towards the higher truth. It always seeks to get transformed. It's never satisfied with the progress it's making, because it knows the perfection is not something that is absolute, but it is more of a relative progress that we have to make. So then we'll move on to the different. Now we have discussed so far what is the meaning of perfection. We've looked at the lower perfection, higher perfection, and the mundane perfection and all of it. So now we will move towards understanding the different perfection of the instruments, the different aspects, that is how to perfect one's body, how to perfect one's mind, how to perfect one's vital aspect, that is the emotional and the energy, the pranic energy that all of us have. We will look at these aspects. So the perfection of the body. Firstly, when the body has learned the art of constantly progressing towards an increasing perfection, we shall be well on the way to overcoming the inevitability of death. So what Mother is saying is, if we are all constantly perfecting ourselves, there will be a time, if we are able to work on the physical perfection also to its utmost level, that the person, death is also something that the person will not encounter. You can be immortal. So why is this? Is because our body is constantly degrading, declining, and constantly, that becomes necessary because we are moving towards this lower aspect. As we are growing, initially what happens, a child's growth is vertical, and it's almost like a mountain to the highest. After youth, young, after to moving towards middle age, our growth declines, right? So because of this physical decline, death becomes inevitable to all of us. But if we are not allowing this consciously, this decline to happen, and if we are constantly progressing and perfecting ourselves, then the sense that aspect of death doesn't come into existence for a person who's moving towards that. And yeah, I think there are a lot of rishis in the Himalayas. A lot of people say that, for them they appear when they want and then they become invisible, and they've moved into that aspect of themselves where they're constantly perfecting. So a lot of spiritual approaches look at body as one of the hindrances in the practice of the yoga, because they feel like body is something that is the most difficult to transform, and they look at leaving the physical life, going away from everything, and ignore the body. Even if you look at Buddha and others, they never focused on transforming the body, but they directly went towards the immortality, what they sought for moksha. But the body is not to be neglected, hurt, or suppressed, or abolished, is what Sri Aurobindo says, because this is a temple. This body is also needs to be transformed. Now, what does the transformation of body looks like? The supramental perfection means that the body becomes conscious, is filled with consciousness, and that as this is the truth consciousness, all its actions, functions, etc. become, by the power of the consciousness within it, harmonious, luminous, right and true, without ignorance or disorder. Now, there is a level of body consciousness. If one is able to transform the body consciousness, there is a certain state of body consciousness which brings together, totalizes, and in all the other states of consciousness alternates, and a person will be able to feel hot, cold, the dualities at the same time. The person is able to harmonize the opposites at the physical level, at the bodily level, and active, feeling active, passive, everything at once, grasping the totality of the movements in the cells. So at the cellular level, the transformation has to happen if the body has to be perfected. And the mother says this is the most difficult to transform, but definitely it is capable of perfection. Even body is capable of perfection. And Sri Aurobindo says the first thing that we need to do when we want to perfect our body is to create a new habit for it, because usually what happens, our body is very much inclined to resorting to older patterns, imperfect ways of being, because it's very used to it. So that needs to be broken and a new habit needs to be formed with all its being, all the consciousness, with all the force, with a lot of aspiration from within. That's when the first aspect of transforming body needs to be there. And as we do this, the more we are allowing the higher force to take over the body, and in controlling and allowing the Shakti to take over the control of the body. And interestingly, a lot of times the mind interferes with the body. A lot of times we want to get up in the morning, what happens? Though the body is ready, our mind says that I want to sleep for a little more time. So the interference of the mind has to be controlled by the will that we have. And the will, having this will, is the first step towards the change. The body must develop a perfect power to hold whatever force that is brought into it. So the body should be able to contain, it should be able to be capable of being filled with the power, intensity of the spiritual light. Should be able to have this holding. He calls it Dharana Shakti. in the physical consciousness, energy and machinery is very important for the transformation of the body. Because when somebody is not ready physically to allow the divine light to work, there some of the instances where some people end up doing a kundalini yoga without preparing the body for it. And there have been cases when some people have gone insane, and also the pressure, the cranial pressure, when the higher force enters the body, if the body is not ready, there have been people who died also in this yogic practices of hatha yoga and so on. So he says the body should not be agitated, upset, broken or damaged by the inrush or the pressure, but it should be more subtle and flexible and luminous for the dharana shakti to have in the body. So this is more about the perfection of the body. Now we'll move towards the perfection of the prana or the vital energy. Now what is this prana? Sri Aurobindo explains this prana is the life energy that we all have, that we all sustain, and which drives us to do any actions, and which was something which is important for the plants, animals, physical man to evolve. To get this pranic shakti is to act more freely and forcibly in the body. So a greater perfection is important, and the pranic instrument, the pranic instrument, that is our body, needs to be able to have this supple flexibility for the energy to process. So a lot of times the energy that we have and even that we are aspiring is blocked in several areas of our body. So when the pranic energy, when we aspire for the transformation of this prana, we are aspiring for a richer, fuller, flexible energy, that is the free and full operation of this energy. Pranic shakti needs to happen in order to transform the pranic vital force in which is there in our body. So when the fullness of the shakti is there, a lot of yoga is also done to experience the fullness of this shakti. Then we move on to something called psychic prana. So it's not merely the energy that is driving us, but the psychic prana is more of the fullness of the vital capacity in the mind. So not allowing any of the impulsions, energies, that is, we want to do some certain work and our energy is focused on it, but what happens is there could be certain imperfections or certain exterior outward influence for this energy to work perfectly. So that's when we need to work on transforming this vital capacity that is there in the mind to do its full work, to take possession of all our impulsions and energies, to give our inner psychic life fulfillment of the existence, carrying it with strength, freedom and perfection. Having all the three things is important for us for the fullness of the psychic prana to be manifested and perfected. And this fullness of the prana should also be accompanied with gladness, clearness and the purity that should be there within ourselves. And all of this, what are we trying to do? We are transforming all of these lower aspects into the aspect of Ananda, divine Ananda. So only when we are experiencing, as we are working towards anything, as we are experiencing the Ananda, that's when we have perfected this psychic prana. glad power of enjoyment, exultant power of pure and divine passion and rapture. That is the state. So, fullness, clarity, purity, capacity for possession and enjoyment. These are the four which are important for the perfection of psychic prana. Now, moving on, we have the perfection of the emotional being of ourselves, because what happens are our emotions are always mixed and colored with a lot of vibrations: good, bad, happy, unhappy, troubled, calm, intense, dull. Always we are moving between these different shades of our emotions. By purification and equality. Equality is again another very important aspect, along with perfection, is important for the complete integral perfection to take place. And once these two elements, equality and purification, happen, then we are trying to harmonize and the tranquil intensity and perfection. So like I said earlier, it is important for us to have both the aspects of the Shakti and the calmness, the intensity and the calmness. So only when we have, then transforming that more towards the, which is called tranquil intensity. Very interesting phrase that Sri Aurobindo uses here. So we are talking about the mildness and the force, Saumya and Raudra, and all these and all the other human perversions have to be got rid of by flowering of a calm, clear and sweet psychic being. And once we engage in this kind of transformation, again there's another hindrance that is possible, that is incapacity of the force. That could also lead to perfection. So there could be weakness, self-indulgence, egoism, which can come into the aspect where we are transforming the energy, inert passivity. All of these again are hindrances or blocks for the energy to work fully within the being. Now all of these should be discouraged, killed, quelled, he says. All of these need to be done that, and then the heart can be filled with the universal Ananda. Now as we are talking about the transformation of the heart, emotional being, Sri Aurobindo also talks about having an equal heart is important. Now what is this equal heart? It is the divine power behind making for good behind all experiences, a faith that is strong inside, a happier spiritual intention even behind an adversity, the mystery of love behind the suffering, the flower of divine strength and the joy in the seed of pain. So if one is able to experience this faith, he calls it Kalyana Shraddha, is needed in the heart in order to transform. Having that intensest capacity for love, able to see the love in everything around, in love in oneself and love around, and having that oneness in all the existent, love for God and all the beings, a delight in the one. This is the highest and most important characteristics, perfection of the heart. Prema Samarthya, he calls it, when the heart is transformed. Now there is the perfection in the mind that is left, the last aspect. Now what are we talking about when we are saying the perfection of the chitta, the mind? When we are looking at is the thinking mind and the intelligence that we have. Now how does it look like when it is perfected, or what should it be perfected from? It should be freed from the claims of the vital being which seeks to impose the desire on the mind. and it should be freed from its own defects. So what happens when somebody's mind is not transformed? His thinking is imperfect, clogged, and his thinking is defected, and he is always having preferences, unwillingness, having this narrowness in thinking, and inertia of thought, like a person does not want to think, and unscrupulousness in thinking, having preferential attitudes. All of this shows that there is a necessity for the mind to be transformed. And how should this transformation happen? First of all, its soul will must make to itself the mirror of truth. So a fine and subtle instrument of harmony and integral intelligence. So what should we be like? Our mind should become like a mirror, as transparent as possible to receive the divine force, to receive the divine energy to transform the mind. This clear and pure intelligence can then become a serene thing of light, a pure and strong radiance emanating from the sun of truth. It should be capable of all understanding, suppleness, richness, flexibility, brilliant with all the flame, an instrument ready and capable for whatever work is demanded from it by the Purusha. So that's the level where our mind is perfected. Now, what are the different aspects of perfection of the mind? Purity, clear radiance, rich and flexible variety, and integral capacity. These are the four aspects for fourfold perfection of our thinking intelligence. Now, the Sanskrit terms Vishuddhi, Prakasha, Vichitrabodha, Sarvajnana Samarthya. All of these are the four aspects. Now we are moving towards, so we have discussed the perfection of the body. We have started with that. We have discussed, then we moved on to perfection of the prana, psychic prana, and then we moved towards the perfection of the heart, emotions, and then finally we discussed the perfection of intelligence, the mind, thinking mind, chitta. So together, the perfection of all instruments need to happen. And all of these, again, they are not individually which need to take place. Like when we were discussing the mind, we also looked at how the vital energy can have an impact on the mind. Similarly, when we were discussing about the prana, we looked at how the mind can interfere when with our pranic energy as well. So all of these together should be harmonized, and a totality of our natural being needs to be there, and the perfection must rise constantly in its capacity for action, the energy and force of its working, the greatness of the scope of the total nature. So everything should be harmonized and work towards what the Purusha is demanding out of all of us, what the highest that is capable of all of us. It should be absolute, unified, luminous spiritual truth of the whole perfected nature. That's what it has to be transformed to. Now, yes, we have discussed in length how this whole process needs to happen. But where is it that we can start in our individual level, at our individual level? Where is it that we can begin this process of the integral perfection? First, self-watching and self-knowledge, a constant practice, abhyasa, that is always being vigilant. What is it that we can do to perfect our mind, perfect our emotions, perfect our body? So in everything that we do, working on self-modification and transformation, having that self-discipline, tapasya, patience, and faithfulness. These are the things that are required until a greater power than ourselves our mental self directly enters in us and transforms. Once the transformation happens, it becomes automatic, like we discussed. It does no longer require our effort. But once we are spiritualized, divinized, the perfection is automatic and continuously evolving. So the perfection of man, therefore, is the full manifestation of the divine in the individual through the supreme accord between Vidya and Avidya. Multiplicity must become conscious of its oneness. Oneness should embrace its multiplicity. That's what Sri Aurobindo talks about in Isha Upanishad. Now, towards the end of the talk, we will discuss about different ways to achieve this perfection. So I will just touch upon this briefly because we have 5 more minutes. So just talk about each point briefly. So first method is by education and training. So like we just saw, constantly being vigilant, constantly by getting educated, like what all of us are involved in today is knowing about perfection is nothing but we are educating our mind, educating so that we can imbibe in our life. So to become perfect instruments and to express the divine will in our world, in this world, it's important for this instrument to become perfect. It must be cultivated, educated, trained. It should almost be like a piece of stone that is constantly being chiseled and sculpted and crafted, is what the mother says. So when you're making a diamond, how we keep cutting it to refine it, keep refining it further. So the second aspect is by being sincere in what we are doing. So as we are perfect in engaging in the journey of perfection, it's very important to continue what we are doing and be sincere in this process. So again, sincerity goes along with surrender. So the more we are able to surrender, okay, today mother, we are not able to do this. Today I was not perfect with so and so. Being that sincere to the mother, just like a child says, I did not do this, very simple, transparently as possible. So being that, having that perfect sincerity, whatever path one follows, whether the path of surrender, consecration, knowledge, if one wants it to be perfect, it is always equally difficult, and there is only one way, that is perfect sincerity, mother says. Then the third one is by becoming conscious of ourselves. So we looked at educating ourselves and training ourselves. We looked at being sincere. Thirdly, becoming conscious. Whenever we can, becoming aware of our imperfections. You have to catch it at the right moment and offer and pray. To work for your perfection, the first step is to become conscious of yourself, the mother says. To increase your actual consciousness, to increase, when is it that the consciousness is low? When is it that you are getting moved by lower aspects of the outward life? When is it that you need to, get back, and having this constant and regular aspect, our simple aspiration, rejection and surrender. This is the mantra that Sri Aurobindo tells us in our integral yoga. So just remembering this and following this little by little, doing this constantly and regularly, it allows for the transformation. But having that patience and determination throughout is very important to be successful. Then the next aspect is by learning to be a witness, not engaging in everything, but learning to separate, detach ourselves in the acts that we engage in the way we talk, in the way we, engage in different social activities. Always not getting involved in it too much, but not being the mind, not being the body, not being the personality, but just being the Manomaya Purusha, just the witness, Sakshi Purusha, where you're just witnessing yourself not as yourself. So that's one way where we can perfect ourselves. Because even in the corporates, when you look at, they ask you to rate yourself. So the feedback, self feedback is very important. So when you look at your work, you have to look at it objectively. Only when you develop that capacity, that's when you can improve yourself. Then the next aspect is by developing equality, that we looked at as one of the most important elements. The calm established in the whole being must remain the same whatever happens, in health and disease, in pleasure and in pain, even in the strongest physical pain, in good fortune and misfortune, our own or that of those we love, in success and failure, honor and insult, praise and blame, justice done to us or injustice, everything that ordinarily affects the mind. We have to try to stay calm. For without it, we do not have any solid basis. Whatever perfection, whatever progress we are making, we are again getting back to the first step if we are not practicing this. And the last aspect is purification of our nature, and by cultivating the faith. So the purification of our nature is something that constantly happens as we are perfecting ourselves. So that is something which goes in line with what it needs to be. And once you need to have faith, that is again which something that cannot be unshakable faith, that having that strong belief always, even if you feel there will be times in life when something happens, when you do not understand, when you feel this is the worst, yet do not leave the faith that you have, because that is something which will help you to bounce back and progress. So having that total surrender to the divine and allowing the Shakti to operate within us. And finally, silencing of the mind is something that we can start with in our day-to-day life, in everything that we do, to perfect ourselves in the most idealistic form possible. So man too becomes perfect only when he has found within himself that absolute calm and passivity of the Brahman, and supports by it with the same divine tolerance and the same divine bliss of free and inexhaustible activity. Those who have thus possessed the calm within can perceive always welling out from its silence and perennial supply of the energies that work in the universe. So, thank you all. I think to end this talk, 4 minutes I have taken extra. I think one last paragraph I would like to read from the Life Divine. A yoga of integral perfection regards man as a divine spiritual being involved in mind, life and body. It aims therefore at a liberation and a perfection of his divine nature. It seeks to make an inner living in the perfectly developed spiritual being, his constant intrinsic living, and the spiritualized action of mind, life and body, only its outward human expression. In order that this spiritual being may not be something vague and indefinable or else, but imperfectly realized and dependent on the mental support and the mental limitations, it seeks to go beyond mind to the supramental knowledge, will, sense, feeling, intuition, dynamic initiation of vital and physical action, all that makes the native working of the spiritual being. It accepts human life but takes account of the large supra-terrestrial action behind the earthly material living, and it joins itself to the divine being from whom the supreme origination of all these partial and lower states proceeds, so that the whole of life may become aware of its divine source and feel in each action of knowledge, of will, of feeling, sense and body the divine originating impulse. It rejects nothing that is essential in the mundane aim, but enlarges it, finds and lives in its greater and its truer meaning, now hidden from it, transfigures it from a limited, earthly, and mortal thing to a figure of infinite, divine, and immortal values.